Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 25th anniversary special that the Women Divers Hall of Fame is putting on. This month, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Dawn Kernagis. The Women Divers Hall of Fame, for the 25th anniversary special, I have the amazing opportunity to interview my fellow sea sisters. They are amazing in their field, and we really wanted to shine a light on their career paths and sometimes the path less chosen, and take a minute to honor all of that they have accomplished and maybe give some insight into how their career paths were shaped and what shaped them. So without further ado, I'd love to bring Dr. Dawn Kernagis on. Hi.
Hey, Stephanie. It's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you too. Thank you for taking the time to hop on here. So I had a moment to read your bio, and it is awesome. I have all of the questions, and I'm sure the audience is going to have a ton of questions as well. So in this, I just wanted to start out, and in the bio, it said that you started diving at 16. How did that begin? Help me understand that.
Yeah, I got certified when I was, and just so I want to say, your bio is equally awesome, as in all the women and What If and our associates. We just have such an amazing community of people and divers. So,
Yes.
yeah, so I started diving. I got certified when I was 15. So I cave diving when I was 16. But I got into it because I just absolutely fell in love with the ocean. I fell in love with the ocean when I was 8 years old. I kind of thought I wanted to be a scientist of some sort. You know, I would geek out at the science museums and collect rocks and read all the books. And then my parents, we moved from Iowa to North Carolina, and we went to the ocean, and it was our first trip down to the beach. And I had the chance to just kind of really get exposed to the ocean. Before that, I'd gone to the Pacific Ocean when I was younger, and I think there are pictures of me just standing there staring at it. But now I was like a kid who had a little bit more of a comprehension of what I was looking at and what the opportunities were. And we also went to the aquarium, the Fort Fisher Aquarium off of North Carolina. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to learn how to, study marine animals, and I want to be a marine biologist. And so I just like literally immersed myself, so to speak, in everything diving, everything undersea, read the Jacques Cousteau books. So I asked for those for Christmas and carried them with me everywhere. As a tech diver, you'll appreciate, I think I was training to become a technical diver, carrying those giant coffee table books on my back. Yeah. And then I finally, was old enough to be able to go through my certification course when I was 15, and like pretty much wouldn't leave the scuba shop after that. So they couldn't get rid of me. So
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what drew you to the technical realm? Was there something that piqued your interest?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because, like I said, I was interested from the marine biology perspective, and then did some wreck diving off the coast of North Carolina. So kind of slowly but surely, you're starting to think about diving a little bit deeper, and just as required, diving off of the North Carolina coast. And then we did a trip to the Florida Springs. And so our dive shop would do, I think it's about monthly trips or so down to the Florida Springs. And so I went down with a group. My dad and my sister went with me, and we went to Ginnie Springs and went into Ginnie Cavern. If any of our listeners have been there, it's like this is open and it's safe so that open water divers can go in there. I think you can't bring lights in, if I remember correctly, but you have a grade, and you just get that little bit of exposure to what it's like to dive in a cave or a cavern. And I was like, I came out and I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to know what's past that grate, what's around the next corner. And so, yeah, I ended up moving in towards cave diving and a little bit more technical diving because of that.
Nice. Yeah. Once you get hooked, I think it's hard to unhook. So there's something special about it, and just having the opportunity to try different disciplines of diving, it really enhances one's comfort in the water, and likes and dislikes. You begin to shape your diving journey. So it's pretty neat. So after the certifications comes college. Talk to me about school. Like how did that shape?
Yeah. So again, thinking I wanted to do marine biology. I think at that point I had shifted to marine archaeology.
Mm.
So just so you know, I went through a lot of different options for what I wanted to be. So, whenever I have younger people ask me like, what should I study? Just study what you're passionate about and it'll work itself out. Right. So,
Oh yeah.
um, so I wanted to study marine archaeology initially. And then I think I actually entered into undergrad at NC State University,
Mhm.
in the physics department. And that's mostly because of diving physics. So I was like, this is
Yeah.
where I want to go. And then slowly but surely, I was like, no, but I'm still interested in the bio part of things. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to fit. So I ultimately ended up in biochemistry. It was kind of like a nice catch-all for a lot of the different things I was interested in. But in the meantime, during that time, I was also diving all the time, like all the way through high school. I was cave diving prom weekend. So didn't go to prom. But I also just like every weekend I got the chance, I would go down to North Florida and go cave diving. So it was about an 8-hour drive to the springs and
Oh,
just
wow.
get as much cave diving in as I possibly could. So, and
Nice.
I, during that time, I started working with some of the different exploration groups in
Yes.
Florida as well. So I kind of got more involved with that. As we move forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. I a friend of mine gave me some cards, and they're thought-provoking questions, and I just wanted to ask one because I've been thinking actually a lot about this in my journey and where I'm at in my life, where the younger generations are asking different questions like the why. A lot of what I do is based in why. So if I asked you the question, I hope to be remembered for dot, dot, dot. I don't know if you can see that. That's the question. What would you want to be remembered for?
Oh boy. I mean, probably just being a good human being and being a good friend to the people in my life, right? And maybe on that level too, maybe a good mentor to some of the younger folks that I get to work with now. Because I know the impact that those people, one, I've just been surrounded by nothing but love and support, I've had a lot of that in my life to allow me and to support me to get to where I am now and to do the things that I love. So I'm grateful for that. On top of that, I've had mentors that have just been incredible. And so I'm starting to shift and I'm in that point in my life where I'm starting to think about how do I pay that back now, right, to the
Yes.
next generation. And
Yes.
so probably a mix, be from, good friend to good mentor, good human being, kind of across the spectrum. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in your journey, so the undergraduate to the next step to graduate, did you have somebody mentoring you and kind of pointing you in the right direction? What made you take the step to graduate stuff?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a wandering path for a bit. So I was working in the dive industry. So I actually went to work for Global Underwater Explorers.
Love them.
I was their first operations manager when they first started. I was working with the dive team, the Woodville Karst Plane project that GUE grew out
Okay.
of. So
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
that through college, and then even after, that was about a decade of working with them as a volunteer and diving with them and helping run operations. But I also, I also like I was doing that. So I was working in the dive industry, and then I kind of moved over into trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I figured I wanted to do something with research. I had some questions that I had around our divers with the WKPP, the
Yep.
project we were working with, because they were doing really deep, kind of almost experimental
Mm-hmm.
dives as far as depth and time went. And so I just so you know, there's a whole other little step in there that I don't typically talk about, but I actually
Ooh.
was au pair for a professional hockey player for 2 years while I was working in laboratories and figuring out my science path. Like I did that too. So and they won the Stanley Cup. And there's a whole backstory. There's a whole other life that I lived outside of
Ooh.
diving and research. Yeah, for a couple of years.
Nice.
So, um, but going back to that, so during that time, I kind of was trying to think about like, well, I want to go to grad school. I want to do research. I wasn't quite sure what the topic was because I thought everything was interesting. It's not that I couldn't find anything. It's like I almost had too many things that I wanted to chase after. And so I was like, well, how do we better protect our divers? And so I had some ideas about looking at genetic risk factors, and how they influence risk of decompression sickness in divers.
Yes.
And so I went to Richard Moon, who's at Duke University. So he's a renowned dive medicine and dive medicine researcher. And so I had actually been one of his research participants for a long time. And so I went to him and I said, I have this research idea. And, he could have easily laughed me out of the room. He did not. He embraced it and was super supportive and said, okay, well, this is great. We need funding to do this. So yeah. I said, well, how do you get funding for that? And he said, well, we have to write a grant proposal. And so he kind of talked me through what that looked like, gave me a sample from a previous grant that he had submitted. And I ended up submitting a proposal. Long story short, I got funded, and that's what funded my graduate research.
Wow.
So I kind of came in the back door to graduate school.
Yeah.
So I had Richard Moon, but then I had, my diving mentors. I had the chance to work with Jared Jablonski. My original diving instructor, John Renfro, is a lifelong mentor, just over all the things I've been doing in life. There's some professors at NC State that were just fantastic. So I've just had all these people kind of influencing along the way, which again, I'm just super grateful for them supporting me to make those next steps.
It makes a difference when you have people in your corner. And
yeah.
I love that you kind of inserted in that you were also an au pair. I mean, paths are never linear. No. And that's what I would love if the audience kind of gets anything out of this series, is that people's paths are never linear. No matter what path you're trying to go down, there is always going to be some type of fork or detour. And it's almost meeting the detour where it's at and figuring out why this is put in front of me. And I'm learning as I age that sometimes these detours are very much meant to be, and there are lessons embedded in all of them. So I do want to remind the audience, please feel free to type in some questions. I'm not the only one that can ask Dawn questions. So we definitely want to hear from the audience. So the research that you did with NC State, with Duke, after that, what happened next? What happened next?
So talk about nonlinear paths, and it all ties together. But if you look at my resume, it wouldn't necessarily look like it ties together. So at Duke, I had the chance to work with all these amazing researchers, doing research that was focused on extreme environments, so diving, but also space and altitude research. I did my research that was focused on genetics and what's called gene expression. So how genes change in response to certain stressors.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, you talk about, things being put in front of you. During that time, there was, I was going to be working with my old cave diving project far as I was going to be working with them as research participants. And weather hit, I think a hurricane hit the area, and they couldn't dive the caves for a stretch of time for a couple of years. So I was like, now I need a new research group. So I ended up working with the Navy Experimental Dive Unit, which was fantastic. Wow. They were amazing to allow me to work with them. Dr. Wayne Girth was just fantastic in opening up that opportunity after I talked to him and being flexible enough to let me work with them.
Yeah.
But then I also had to kind of figure out some other things that, just kind of renew my research project for grad school a little bit. And so I ended up learning how to look at gene expression in another population, and that is in cancer patients. So we ended up doing studies around breast cancer gene expression, breast tumor gene expression, and also ovarian tumor gene expression. And a big piece of that was just me learning how to look at the data and handle it and understand it and everything else. And so my thesis topic ended up combining breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and decompression stress markers, all related to gene expression, but it was a very different thesis than I thought I was going to have coming out of things. But again, working with my mentors, saying, I'm still learning. I'm still, learning to do all the things. It's just going to be in a little bit of a different way. And they were wonderful and supporting me in that. And so just another shout out to my mentors. That was Richard Moon was my co-advisor for my PhD. And also Mike Dado was my other co-advisor for my PhD. And they were just wonderful in working with me around that approach.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't realize that that was that when you sent me the resume, I didn't note about the breast and ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
It's that is a topic actually that hits close to home to many people.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think we all know somebody that is affected, has been affected by both of those diseases.
Yeah.
So the research that's going into fighting and developing different treatments is a noble one. So
Yeah.
thank you for all that you're doing.
No, yeah. It's previous work that I did, but it was cool because it seeded some conversations with Allison Vitsky, who runs Dive into the
Dive into
Pink.
pink.
And
Yeah.
so we had some early conversations, and she's just doing such amazing. She's carried that work on. We did some initial survey-based work that we still need to publish, actually.
Yeah.
But we did some initial survey-based work, but she has carried that into such a whole other level, and it's really been exciting to watch the work that she's doing with Dive into the Pink. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That nonprofit is amazing, and
Yeah.
I'm totally going to put her on the spot. Allison, maybe October we can light it up pink. Just saying. So, Breast Cancer Awareness Month is later on in the year, and to highlight her and the work that she has done and the path that she is paving for research and knowledge is amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, awesome. Another C sister. So,
Yeah.
now I want to know about the NASA NEMO project.
Yeah.
Tell me all the things.
Yeah, so I had again a little bit more of a wandering path. So I'd like to say I'm Forrest Gump, so just kind of like go this way, go that way, but still staying in biomedical research. I still have my hand in research around extreme environments, but I actually, for my postdoc, so after I finished my PhD, I did a few years of a postdoc at Duke University, and that was focused on studying how to protect the brain in extreme environments, including in the clinical setting.
Yep.
And so I ended up getting recruited to go to an organization called the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. And it is located in Pensacola, Florida. They also have a site in Ocala, Florida. And they were really well known for robotics and AI. Like that was kind of their areas of expertise. But the founder, Ken Ford, another mentor of mine, said, he came to me actually through another colleague of mine, said, I'm looking for somebody who's young in the field, but could help develop a program focused on human performance in extreme environments.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very niche topic. But so he said, you've got to talk to Dawn. And so Ken connected with me. We ended up having a breakfast meeting in Washington, D.C. when we were both there. And long story short, I ended up going to IHMC for 5 years. And it was just an incredible opportunity to build a program from scratch, like to build a program from the ground up. And it was a really cool opportunity. So during my I think it was the first 2 years that I was there, we had these meetings called Blue Sky meetings. They're like these brainstorming sessions for different government agencies and different commercial organizations. And this one was I think it was for NASA, it may have been for the Navy, or maybe it was a joint Blue Sky meeting. But the person who founded NEMO, Bill Todd, he was at this meeting talking about sea to space. That was the point of the meeting, is like what can be shared from sea to space. Yeah. And so he and I started talking about some research ideas. I was like, I'd love to do some of my research on one of your NEMO missions. Just, give it to the astronauts to do. That'd be amazing. I'll try to find funding. And he and one of the people that I was working with at the time, and who is now the chief scientist at IHMC, Tim Broderick, another mentor, called me up. And this is maybe a couple months after we had talked about this research project. And so, I'm just gearing up towards like, what research equipment do I need to have there? And like, building out the protocol. And they said, well, what are you thinking about for diving? Like, would you like to dive? I was like, oh, I will dive to clean the bottom of boats. I'll do whatever you guys, just to get in the water around the NEMO mission. That would be amazing. And they said, well, we're thinking about you as a crew member. And I couldn't speak for about a minute. I was just sitting there like, this is amazing. I mean, it was maybe like 30 seconds, and they kept talking. And I said, no, you don't have to convince me. Like, I'm convinced. I'm in. So that was a life-changing experience.
I bet.
Yeah, it was my chance to get back to what I was passionate about in the first place, which is being in a team environment, in the water, in the field. And that's what really drove me to do the research that I was doing. And so to be able to combine that science piece and the diving piece into one was just amazing. And then the crew that we had was just fantastic. I can't say enough great things about Bill Todd and Mark Regan, who run Nemo, and their team, all the scientists that work with them. And then at Aquarius Reef Base, which is the undersea habitat where they run Nemo, Roger Garcia, Hank Stark, they have a whole team there that's just so professional. I can't say enough wonderful things about them. And so we just had this magnificent project and got so much research done over the course of our mission. So just a little bit of background on Nemo. So they've been running, NASA's been running Nemo since 2000, almost every year. I think the last one was in 2022.
Yeah.
And they, I have to say that correctly. Was it 2022? No, I think it was just before the pandemic. It was around the pandemic. Sorry.
Yep. We all lost a big space of time during
I think it's 2019 was actually the last NEMA mission, but I don't want to say that incorrectly because they've transitioned it to what they call C-Test, which is not a habitat-based mission, but they still have astronauts going undersea off of Catalina now. Yeah. It's 2019. Sorry.
No.
Yeah. So essentially they send astronauts to go live in an undersea habitat for, up to several weeks at a time to test out protocol and software and hardware that are going to space station. And sometimes they integrate other types of research like marine science research or, human research, diving research into those missions. So it was just a very, very cool opportunity to be a part of all of that.
That is amazing. Now, obviously space is a high stress environment, as is depth. Do you find that those two environments are you finding similarities in your research when you're studying humans both in space and humans that are underwater in habitat? Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just living in that isolated environment, you're not getting, the natural sunlight. Sometimes your natural rhythms are kind of thrown off a little bit, more so in space than undersea. Yeah. You have to be concerned about elevated carbon dioxide in that environment if it's not removed properly. Just living in that kind of high physiological stress environment in general. So in the habitat, you're living in a condition called saturation. So you get to a point where the inert gas, so in this case, we were breathing air, so it was nitrogen, essentially equilibrates with your blood and tissues. So you're saturated with nitrogen, but that also means that you can't just come straight to the surface. You have, about a 16-hour decompression before you can come back to the surface from that depth that we were living at, which is about 50 feet. And so there are certain changes that happen to the body in saturation. And so some of them are similar to what you see in space flight, but it's just a kind of a different stress. It's just a kind of like, it's the body being under stress in general.
Yeah.
Considerations of food, considerations of keeping the environment clean, crew dynamics is a big one. So you're putting a lot of people into a small space. Hopefully they all get along.
Yes. Yeah. That could make for some interesting conversation.
Oh yeah. It's, you either bond really well or maybe not, but thankfully we bonded really well. But it's cool because with the habitat, so we could do excursions outside of the habitat. So you're not, the whole purpose is that you're in the habitat, but then you can do dives outside the habitat we were doing dives, up to 5 or 6 hours, which you wouldn't be able to do with traditional scuba. And Correct. So we could get a lot of work done outside the habitat. And this is why commercial divers and military divers use saturation diver training or diving, especially for deeper depths that they're working at. And so when we're doing those excursions outside the habitat, diving is similar. There's a lot of similarities to when an astronaut goes outside of the station for a spacewalk.
Yeah, I would assume, yes. It's quite interesting. During all of this research, was there anything that you discovered that really kind of blew your mind that you were not expecting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. Some of the we had some samples that were collected by one of my colleagues, and it was still, keep in mind these are really small numbers, so we really need to expand the numbers. But we saw some interesting changes to genes at that depth during that time. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when we collect these samples at the time, we were collecting like blood samples, for example, from the crew members, and then bringing them to the surface and then processing them. So after that, just that process of bringing that sample to the surface is going through decompression like a diver would. And
Yes.
there are certain changes that happen to the body during decompression and at the cell level that happen during decompression. So one thing that we're excited about, and I'll talk about this a little bit later with some of the work we're doing now with current habitats, is we'll have space to actually not just collect those samples, but actually process them at depth.
At
So
depth.
you can actually have an undersea laboratory where you can process those samples and actually see what's happening in result of being in saturation versus as a result of decompressing that sample back to the surface.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because you already have the decompression samples. So having something to compare it to
Yeah.
is going to be quite interesting,
Yeah.
and give you a lot more probably questions to answer
Yeah.
out of everything.
Probably, which is exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The during this journey, because it's been, there's a lot. There have been detours, there have been research, there's been schooling, a lot of schooling. What was there anything that you had to overcome that sticks in your mind while forging this path of yours?
I think just it sounds so cheesy, but just following your heart. It's, there's so many times where I was like, this is what I want to do, but then there are people, some people who are, and out of my best interest, so it wasn't malicious intent. They're like, this is what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm lucky. There's a degree of like, I'm really thankful that things worked out the way they did, but I always stuck to it, right? Like I was like, this is what I want to do. I will figure it out. And there are definitely hurdles that were thrown often in my path in that sense. And that just happens, especially in the research side of things.
Yes.
And so I really think research part of it is just like, how resilient are you? And can you like find a way to navigate around the things that you're not expecting, like funding freezes and other things like that, right? And so, and that happened because of budget hold during my graduate work. I mean, this happens all the time. So it's just something like we have to figure out how to flex around that. But I just stuck to it to a certain degree and just figured out like, okay, maybe I can't do exactly that thing, but if I can do this other thing that's going to eventually feed into what I want to do, it worked out. So I think just staying the course and sticking to it, following your heart about what you're passionate about, I think is really important.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Is there anything that people misunderstand about you? This is one of the questions. Sometimes people often misunderstand about me blank. Does that resonate? Does that hit with you?
Oh, yeah. I probably one of the things I get, and I say this, like I say I'm lucky and everything. And they're like, oh, you're just so lucky. And I will say this, like, yes, things have worked out in amazing ways and it could have not worked out the way they did. And I always acknowledge that. But some of it is because of just making decisions that probably weren't the popular decisions to make. So, just staying that course instead of doing the thing that may have made me more money or, I definitely have had that conversation. Like, you can make more money if you do. This is back when I was in grad school. You can make a lot more money if you're doing this instead. And I was like, yeah, but that's not what I want to do. I wouldn't be happy.
Yeah.
So I don't think we joke around about being lucky. My boyfriend has a song that he's written about me being lucky in everything I do. But there is an element of making those hard decisions, right? And staying the course. So, and then again, also having that support. Here's Bonnie.
Hey, Bonnie.
Hey, Bonnie.
Any hurdles due to being a woman in primarily a male field? Did you hit those?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I just had this great network around, but I definitely saw that happen to other friends of mine that were in certain, like as a grad student in particular, postdoc in particular, being in specific labs where, maybe they didn't have the right support in place. But, I don't know if it's necessarily a female thing versus just, just having somebody who's not a good advisor in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to think, going back to my team members. I mean, one thing I'll say is I didn't have a ton of female role models. So, and if I'm just going all the way back to when I started technical diving and cave diving, there were not, this was back in the 90s, right? Like back in the early to mid 90s when I started cave diving. It's funny because recently I wrote something, an article for Dan, and it was talking about lights, and I talked about light failure. And somebody's like, well, how do lights fail like that? That often. I was like, our lights back then were very different than the lights we have now,
Oh, yeah.
by the way.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, this is 30 years ago. So, which makes me feel really old when I say that out loud, but, yeah,
Same.
but yeah. But I think back then that was a big gap for me, is just not having those female role models. So one thing that I had Jill Heinrich, like I absolutely looked up to Jill, like first and foremost, and Sylvia Earle. And if I go down the C Sisters list for what if, like I can say there's just some women that I've been looking up to since I was a young girl, and all the way through. So one thing I would like to give back in that sense is maybe providing that role model status, for somebody, male or female, but in particular for those females that maybe wouldn't have had that kind of role model in the past. So
yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I was my entering into the industry was in the 90s as well, and it was there are very few of us, if you will, and sometimes doing the unpopular, made your target, and or had to prove yourself or work harder, being the hardest worker in the room for maybe not as much acknowledgement, sometimes hits with some of us that have spent decades in this industry. So it's nice to be present and forward so that others see something familiar and maybe say, hey, I resonate with something that Dawn said, I can do this. Yeah. This might not be the path I intended, but there's a reason for this. So I think that's what a lot of this series, with me having the amazing opportunity to interview the C Sisters, to see, hey, I've done this. This is what it took to get me here. Positive attitude, hardest worker in the room, not letting there's so many things. So it's so exciting for the viewership to have something like this to fall back on. So next, I wanted to talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Really exciting. Deep. Tell us about, for the viewership that does not know what the deep.com, Deep Project, tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now director of scientific research for an organization called Deep. So we're a commercial organization that is started in the UK, and we have this view of being global very soon. So we're very excited about that. But we are essentially, our tagline, our goal is to make humans aquatic. And so we are building undersea human occupied habitats. But we're not just building the habitats, we're also building the training system, the operations protocol, the potential submersibles that lock in and lock out with those habitats, the whole infrastructure that goes around having humans living undersea, including the advanced manufacturing piece of things. So there's like lots of parts and pieces that feed into the work that we're doing at Deep. So it's just a dream job. I talked about how Nemo allowed me to combine that diving operational background and that team environment with research. So this job absolutely does the same thing, but on a full-time level, and really rethinking how humans interact with the ocean, which I'm really excited about. So yeah.
What pieces, what has been challenging about this in a good way? What do you see?
Yeah, it's like a startup, right? I mean, so we were founded in 2020, but came out of stealth in fall of 2023. I started with Deep officially full time very early last year, so in 2024. Yeah. So, but we're still very much young and growing, and like lots of moving parts and pieces. I mean, I came from a background working in academia for quite some time. And then I moved over. So I was actually in a faculty position when they recruited me to Deep.
Oh, wow.
And so very, very different mindset and approach to things, from academia to commercial, especially kind of a startup space. So, but really exciting. I mean, safety is foremost. That's the major driver for everything that we do. So it's not like we're moving so fast, that's an issue. That's, the major thing that we're focusing on. But it's just nice to be able to move and make decisions without 10 committee meetings that run over 12 months. We can make decisions as a team and move forward with things pretty efficiently. And we're making those decisions to optimize, production and safety and all the things that are really important to us. So, yeah.
What do you see? Where do you see Deep in like 5 years? What do you see happening?
Yeah, so our goal by 2027 is to have a sustained human presence undersea. So that's like within 5 years, is to have multiple habitats on the bottom of the ocean and to have 24/7, just like we have in outer space with space
Yes.
station. We have a permanent human presence in space and have since 2000. So we want to have the same thing for undersea. It was, I mean, and we're thinking in a saturation type environment, not
Mhm.
necessarily you have people in submersibles, which is incredible, but this is divers interacting with the water and being in saturation.
Neat,
Yeah,
neat.
yeah.
It's exciting. So with Deep, are there any unknowns, anything that caught you by surprise? I always love to know what people went in thinking and then say, hey, I never really thought of that. Is there anything does that question hit?
Um, I think, I mean, honestly, I think the big thing for me was like the excitement from the dive medicine side of things, because there was a lot of, I'm coming from that angle just because that was my background, but talking to the dive medicine community, there's substantial research done on saturation diving back in the 70s and 80s. But there's a big level of interest in revisiting a lot of that research, especially with neurotechnology. And
Yeah.
so we're really excited to be at the forefront of that and participate in that. So, if we're thinking about the research that was done back in the 70s and 80s, it was mostly commercial or military divers, young, fit male, typically, not always, but most of the time.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying to increase access subsea for a broader
Mhm.
population. So as we're thinking about the saturation diving studies, looking at different ages and the effect, looking at, not just young fit males anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about being able to contribute in that capacity. And it was exciting to see the biomedical research community just jumping at the bit to try to get some of that research built out with us as well.
Oh, I bet. I
Yeah.
bet.
Yeah.
The sky or the sea is the limit in that. That's amazing. So you have people up in space that are there inhabiting space, and then you have it under the ocean. It would be amazing to have those two connection points and Earth be, the middle ground, if you will. It's quite fascinating. I was thinking about it, trying to figure out how to ask you intelligent sounding questions
No,
during
that's perfect. I mean,
during this.
I'm like a little kid, like getting to do what we do, and just you're just making that point of like connecting sea to space, and we are definitely. I mean, Nemo is a shining example of that, right? Where they use undersea environment, and they do the same thing at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at Johnson Space Center, and European Space Agency has something similar, where they train astronauts and use the water environment for that training. And
Yes.
Nemo does the same thing. And so we're having conversations with folks in the space community, about kind of building that back up or building that up even more, which we're really excited about and the possibilities in that setting. And when I was on Nemo, one of the coolest moments, I was talking to one of the astronauts. I was at a NASA meeting last week,
Ah,
and we had the chance to do a satellite call from undersea, from the habitat to space station. So it
wow.
was a sea to space call, and the crew member, Kate Rubens, who's, she had been in Nemo Aquanaut prior, and so she had been down there before. She's floating in space station in microgravity, and she kept laughing, and she kept kind of laughing herself off camera. She was floating off camera, and we were all laughing. It was great. But I just remember looking like, this is insane. Like, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Like having, we had our iPad up against the window. You could see the fish swimming back and forth behind, and we're doing this call to space. And I just love thinking about the connectivity, that's just kind of symbolic, right? Of this bigger scale connectivity that we're trying to build out. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's stunning I mean, if you just think about the pressure alone, the pressure underwater, the pressure in space, and being able to have that video call is fascinating, and all that goes into all of the years of research and effort that it takes. It's not. Yes, you might have. People have mentioned that you're lucky. Well, luck doesn't get you up at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Luck doesn't persevere. Luck doesn't try to find inventive ways. That's grit and passion.
Yeah.
A little bit of pixie dust with luck might be sprinkled there, but and to be able to be part of that has got to really light your fire.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I'll say, so what, when I left IHMC, that was in 2020, And I went to the University of North Carolina for a stretch of time as faculty, and I had a great opportunity to work there with some amazing colleagues in the neurosurgery department.
Oh,
Again, how's that fit? But I was studying how to protect the brain and nervous system in extreme environments. And if you think about an extreme environment, the operating room is about as extreme as you're going to get for the brain
yeah.
and nervous system. So we're doing a lot of work that crossed over to patient populations and
Huh.
vice versa. What can we learn from patients so we can translate to individuals working in extreme environments? And I had this great job. Like, I love my faculty position. I love being at UNC. I was back in North Carolina. I still am, still in North Carolina. But when this opportunity arose, I was like, I can't back away from this. It wasn't the popular, it's funny. Some folks that know me, they're like, this is your dream job. It's no brainer that you're taking this position. And then some people who really care about me are like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, it's you have this faculty position and you're comfortable and this sounds amazing. But, and so, yeah, just making those choices. And, I'm super thankful that I'm in this position and just get to have so much fun. I work with amazing colleagues, who are all equally passionate about what we're doing, which is a big driver for how we're getting things done. And we'll be able to get people under sea quickly. and soon.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the good that it will do for science moving forward and space. And for those of us that live, in the in between, it's fascinating to be able to pull your research, to pull what's going on underwater in space and really take a look from different dimensions, if you will, and see how it will benefit others is truly fascinating. And so
we always talk about that. Right now we have outer space, but what about our inner space? And so it's exciting to think. I mean, we're all invested in it from the diving side of things.
Oh yeah.
But I think just being able to expand and innovate when it comes to inner space is a really exciting prospect. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the bridging of the two is really special. You get a chance to meet folks that are not necessarily in your discipline, but have maybe a bigger picture in mind of collaborative work.
Yeah.
So it's really neat. Okay, Jennifer, love the nonlinear pathways, something we can all relate to. Yes, 1,000%. And it's, I know my path has not necessarily been linear. It was never my intention to be in the diving industry, but yet here I am. So it's sometimes a path less traveled. And yeah, so.
Yeah, it's funny. I was so I was at a neurosurgery meeting. This is, back when I was in the previous department, and I was with another one of my mentors and some friends of his, and they're all, just amazing neurosurgeons, which to me, I just have in awe of, folks that work in that space. And,
Yes.
And so everybody was telling stories about like, how did you get to where you are? And not a single person at that table said, I was 5 years old. I want to be a neurosurgeon. This is what I'm going to do. And they made it there. It was like, well, then I did this, and then I wandered this way, and then I did this thing. But it was all building experience and perspective and passion, right? So they were all building that along the way, and it all feeds into who they are now as professionals. And so it made me feel good. It's like, and when I look at the people that I really have respect for, a lot of them have done the same thing, right? Just kind of figuring it out as they go. And we always kind of talk about reinvention, I think, is something that you're seeing more and more of. It used to be, and this, I don't think this is a bad thing. I think back in the past, you'd have people work for, the same position, same company for 40, 50 years, right? And then they retire and that was it.
Yeah.
But now you see folks that do go through and they, excel and do what they're doing in their one industry. And then they follow their heart and they reinvent and they go in the next direction, but they're still carrying all those lessons learned from that previous position. So yeah.
Oh yeah. And lessons learned with interaction, how to work with other people.
Yeah.
These are life skills that can't be taught. These have to be earned and learned.
Yeah.
And it's, you build your toolkit, and having those experiences gives you something to bring to the next position or next change. I mean, we're all different versions of ourselves, and getting ready to shed the skin and present ourselves for the next iteration. It's natural evolution of people.
Yeah.
Women.
Yeah.
We have a chance to be identified in different spaces as a professional, as a friend, as a mentor, as a mother, as a as a partner, it does not matter. But that version of yourself looked very different 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yes. Yeah. It's that complex. That's where all the wrinkles and gray hairs come from
gray
too.
hairs. Yeah, I would call them sparkle in my house.
It sparkles. Yeah, that's what my stylist calls them.
I
Yeah.
sparkle.
Yeah.
I sparkle a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, but those are lessons learned. And there, somebody said, we don't have to do what we do. We get to do what we do.
Yeah.
It's a big difference. And I take that to heart.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful that that's the case, right? Like, I mean, I remember, both my parents had such a profound positive effect as far as work ethic and perspective and everything. And again, just so supportive throughout, my career, my sister's career. But my dad, I remember having a conversation with my dad, and he said, if I ask you to do one thing, he's like, do something you're passionate about. Like, I remember having that conversation with him, and he's like, you're going to spend most of your life, your adult life working, like, make sure it's something that you love to do. And, I've always carried that with me. And I've had that conversation with other folks recently who may not be in a position where, they are necessarily, they feel stuck and they're like, this isn't what I want to do. I don't feel passionate about that. I've had a conversation with relatives who are like, I watch you and you love what you do. And I was like, well, you could too. I mean, I know it's not that easy. I know there's a lot, especially if you have family and everything else, but there's always ways to try to figure out how to kind of add in those parts and pieces, to have that mindset around, really enjoying what you do and feeling good and loving what you do. So, yeah.
Small steps. And sometimes small steps lead to a slow burn, and it's earned. It's not given or granted. That's the thing that I've not learned, but really truly embraced, that my pathway has taken 28 years to get where I am. It did not happen overnight. And it happened because of perseverance, great mentors, and a fuel to not give up. I just don't. And then the final question is, I have some clarity about ... Has anything become clear during your path to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, to me, the clarity is the important. It sounds hopefully not cliche, but the importance of balance. Yeah, I am known to work until I burn out and then collapse and then bounce back again, then go again as hard as I can. I'm trying to not, I just can't do that as much anymore as I get older. What I could get away with in my 30s, I can't necessarily get away with now in my late 40s. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. I want that balance. I want to have that quality time with my family and my loved ones and, my partner and my cats and doing the things that I'm passionate about that are outside of work. And so I'm very thankful to have almost always had organizations that were supportive of that, but I didn't necessarily take advantage of that support. And so I think just really, I think I even said, like, in one of these New Year's things, like, what's your word for the new year? And I think it was last year I said balance. Yeah. And I'm still working on it. I think we're always working on it. Right?
Balance comes, I think, in waves. And I think as we age or have had the opportunity to age, we certain things, I guess I have learned that I care less about what others think of me, because quite frankly, it's none of my business. Yeah. So that has been a huge.
That's an interesting perspective on it. Yeah.
It's really none of my business. I can't shape others' opinions of me, and it's been probably the most freeing thing that I have gifted myself in my 40s. And I think that's one thing that I would love to impress upon maybe the younger individuals watching this is, it's your life. And when you skid to the end, it's got to be what you wanted, not impressing upon others. It's not worth it.
Yeah. I remember in the diving, like, kind of bringing that comment back to the diving community too. I remember just, and I think it's just being younger. You just care, right? You care about what everybody thinks. But what I've found is, and it's kind of thinking about that clarity question, right? Like, what I see now, what I love is when I come to the dive industry trade shows, like DEMA, or any of the shows, the people that are coming together, we come from all walks, all backgrounds, different agencies. I remember when it seemed like, I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day in the industry, about like when it mattered. It's like, oh, but I got certified with so-and-so, I can't dive with you. And, I mean, definitely safety is a priority and all these different things, but it was just this like us versus them mentality and all this stuff in politics and drama.
Yes.
And it's like, what I love now is that when I go to these dive industry trade shows, what I see is people coming together because they're passionate about the same thing.
1,000%.
Yeah. And I love that. I absolutely love that. It's refreshing because it's like, again, like you said, we get to do this. And so I think all of us in that room, or most of us in that room, understand that and, appreciate being around other people who are in the same circumstance and appreciate it too. So
1,000%. 1,000%. It hits different when you look at it from a lens of not age, but wisdom. You can call it wisdom. So that's, and the thing you had mentioned during your time at university about funding and scholarships, the one thing I did want to weave into this is the Women Divers Hall of Fame puts together an amazing grant and scholarship program. And I need to fact check this. I didn't do it, but I have a feeling we're one of the largest ones in the industry to distribute funding, period.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it was the exact numbers around $78,000-$80,000 this year. So that's in a year that we are able to collect and distribute that to individuals that would like to better themselves in any discipline, any way, photography, diving, training grants, et cetera. And that I think is pretty profound. And Bonnie says, yes, we are. It's really cool to be a part of that. And as associates that are part of the Women Divers Hall of Fame, they have access to an amazing plethora of contacts. And an associate membership, I think, is $35, where you gain access to different mentorships, to events and trips that the Women Divers Hall of Fame runs, which are $500,000 since 2002.
Incredible.
Which is incredible, considering that there were not many of us women in the diving industry at that time. I remember the DEMA show floor. My first DEMA was in 1998. And I was few and far between when it came to being a woman. So to see that we have collectively come together and raised over $500,000 speaks volumes of collaboration and not having to do it, but getting to do it. So just had to give a shout out to those that have worked tirelessly to put that together, which leads me to my next guest. Next month, I have the opportunity to interview Dr. Shirley Pomponi, who
love Shirley.
Awesome, and she heads up the grant department with the Women Divers Hall of Fame and does an amazing job. So Crimson says, how old does one need to be to apply for the scholarships, and is there an application period? If you go to the Women Divers Hall of Fame website, I believe woodoff.org, or Google it, you will see that the applications and scholarships, there's a section, and it gives all of the information about age, about time period. There's an open and a close for the scholarships. They should be opening in the coming months. And depending upon the type of scholarship, may or may not dictate age based on what it's intended for. For example, training grants, there are certain standards that you need to follow when it comes to age. But there's a plethora of options for people that want to see what we have to offer, which is vast.
And I see Bobby just put the descriptions link in the chat too. So for anybody who's looking at that, thank you, Bobby.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. And so any parting words of wisdom?
I mean, I think just kind of repeating, and going back to what if I was just thinking about, you were talking about that network. I remember the first time I went into a room for Women Divers Hall of Fame, and I sat down, and I think for that meeting, folks got, I think it was the members who got to stand up and introduce themselves. And I remember just being in awe, right? And it wasn't just like the fact that some of these women, like I've been just, watching them my whole career since I was a young girl and being influenced by them and inspired by them, but also the variety So we have people with such a wide variety of backgrounds who have touched on so many different aspects of not just diving, but undersea, the research angle of things, engineering, military, you go down the list.
Yeah.
So we pretty much have one or probably many of women that in the organization who can be reached out to and who can be there as mentors and as support for some of the younger folks, which I really love. And so I think just maybe parting words if there are younger people listening to this, or even just women, you don't have to be younger, women aspiring, to get more involved. I would say, Women Divers Hall of Fame is just such a great community and such a supportive community for anybody who wants to get involved in diving, and either as a career, or even as something as a hobby, and just get more experience in different areas. So highly recommend checking it out. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Good point. Thank you for taking the time to do this. And for everybody listening, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to our talk, to implore you to follow your own path, figure out who your mentors are, take a look at the Women Divers Hall of Fame website and social media channels. There's so much information to be had there and so much to learn. And I just want to wish everybody a good night. Take care.